Behind the session that we've got today is be quick and to the point. We're not going for a full hour long presentation of things like that. It's like, let's get to the meat of the situation, work through it, and we'll get you back to the rest of whatever you were doing within maybe like half an hour here. Trying to get it going, like I said, quick and move through it. As we're doing that, just a little bit of background. If you've never been to a webcast that I've helped lead before, just to reiterate, my name again, Joe Eichenseer, out of our Denver, Colorado office in, gosh, what's a little bit of a cloudy day today. But I've been with IMAGINiT for quite some time. And as it relates to the topic that we've got here, a fair amount of that time, IMAGINiT's been involved with some level of remote or blended workforce. So as we're moving into the interesting world that we're in today, the intent behind this is to provide at least some thoughts or things that we've gone through, or the things that we think about or think that you ought to think about when considering what are we doing in a remote working, remote solution world that we're in today. It's not to say that we've got every solution and this is exactly what you need to do. It's more talking about here's the path to follow, the types of things to be working toward, knowing that there's going to be all sorts of different answers for different people based off of your specific situation. And as we're doing that, as we're thinking about all that reality that we're in right now, it's just basing it when we're talking about remote solutions, we're thinking about the reality that we're in a different physical space than many, if not all, of our colleagues. And how are we going about work in that environment? We've been doing it for a few months now, right? In some form or another. Again, everybody's different, but we've been doing it in some form or another for a few months. And is what you're doing right? Is what you're doing the best it can be? At first, we started off and said, well, let's just do what we can to get by at when COVID hit and when we all had to not work in the office for a while. But did that set of things that you were doing of this is just what we need to do to get by, did that become your reality and that's what you're still doing today? Are there places where it can be better than what you started off doing? It's just you fell into a habit and it's good enough. We're getting stuff done. But good enough doesn't always cut it. If we can do better, why not do better? And how do we go about figuring these things out? How do we go about understanding what's the right way to hit all of this? So in that context, as we're going through it, I want to really break this down into, we'll call it 4 major categories. You can go into deeper subcategorization for all of these things. You might not say, well, some of these are overlapping. Absolutely. But for the sake of the time that we've got here, let's use these as that starting point. The idea of when we're looking at defining and working through how we're working and producing work remotely, the major things that I've got here is just the IT infrastructure. How technically is your infrastructure set up to allow things to happen? We'll get into, again, the details of all that as we're going through and talking about things, but what does that infrastructure look like? Once you know what the infrastructure is like, moving over to data access and maintenance, what are the applications that you're specifically using and how are you using them within the available infrastructure that you've got set up within your firm? How are you maintaining and working with all of that data from an application standpoint? After we know here's the environment we're in, the applications that we're using within that environment, then to the next degree of detail, how are you using your IT infrastructure and those applications to collaborate in a project, to deliver on a project? So it's a matter of defining how we're going through and breaking things down piece by piece into greater and greater detail. We just don't want to look at everything all at once. Let's define it into actionable areas at different levels. You might also look at this as, imagine, if you will, a series of concentric circles or something where in the middle you've got project delivery. That's the target. We have to deliver on our projects. How do we do that? Well, we need to collaborate both internally and externally. So that would be a circle around the center target of delivery. Well, how do we collaborate? Well, we use software for that. Okay, what's the software we're doing? Great. Now, how do we what's the infrastructure that that software can work on. That'll be that outside circle. So each one of different things, all sorts of ways it can go about it. Now, this is looking at that solution from the idea of the virtual and tangible things that are out there that we use. But one of the taglines that we've got at IMAGINiT, one of the things that we tend to look at when we're considering various solutions is that a lot of that ends up coming down to the idea of people, process, and technology. There's those three things that have to come together at some form or another for everything to work. Within the office connectivity, the design applications, your collaboration and delivery, within all of those things, how are the people engaging with it? How's the technology working with it? What are your processes to allow you to work through that? All those have to really come together in some level of harmony, hopefully, to be able to make sure that we're working in a level of an optimized system. So those four major categories with the idea of people, process, and technology. If we go to that first part then and saying, well, if we're working through this remote world that we're in, what does that IT infrastructure look like? How are we connected back to the office, a virtual office, physical office, whatever that might happen to be? Are you using cloud-based workstations, not just data storage, but cloud-based workstations? There's customers that we have that are going that direction, are already there. Are you using something like Autodesk BIM 360 to help out with connecting data and connecting people? That's part of, it's not your IT infrastructure necessarily because you're getting that from Autodesk, from Amazon, but it's part of the broader IT infrastructure that we need to think about. Are you skipping that whole thing? Let's go with a VPN connection. Okay, within that VPN connection, then are you using remote desktops or are you running the software on the computer that's physically in front of you? How are you handling messaging and chat? So many people are these days probably going to things like Microsoft Teams. If you've got Office 365, that's probably the case, but that's not everything. Are you using Slack or any number of different types of applications out there? Are you connecting and talking with people using voice over IP, computer audio, like you maybe are right now getting into this particular webcast, or plain old not television, plain old telephone service, POTS? Are you talking just over the phone and you dial somebody up that way? An interesting thing there, when you look at that from a people process technology thing, just that idea of voice. This will be pulling to a little bit of our internal way that we're working within IMAGINiT, but it's a really interesting thing that I've noticed that when we started and we did more of a disbursement than we usually have been with COVID coming around, we started doing a lot of different things with Teams calls. You just hit the call button and you just start talking to somebody. What I found myself doing there's a difference in feel for how that's going for myself and for others, where if I'm going to be making that call through Microsoft Teams or whatever platform you have, I'm almost always now reaching out and typing to that person and saying, hey, can you take a call? Then I get a yes or a no. If it's a yes, then I hit the call button and we start talking. Prior to that, when I was in the office almost all the time, at least when I wasn't traveling or doing whatever else, if I needed to call somebody, I'd just pick up the phone and dial their extension, and whatever happened. It's a weird thing about that merging of people, process, and technology, that as soon as we went to this online Teams version of talking to each other, there was this, oh, well, maybe they're not ready for me. And maybe I'm not actually, it's not a good time for us to call. I never checked before. Was that a bad thing before? Was I maybe not being as conscientious as I could have been by not checking to see if somebody could take my call before I made it? I wouldn't think so, but it's that different world we're in right now. And we have to be thinking about things. And am I just being silly right now? And I'm doing something by checking of, hey, can I call you before I call? That really isn't necessary. And it's maybe not a waste of time. It's a common courtesy, whatever. But these are the types of things that we need to be thinking about. Some of them are going to be minor like that, but some of them become a lot more significant when we're thinking about how is this connectivity between people, between technologies. How are we connected through the office? These are the types of items that we need to define. And at this point, we're not saying, is anything specifically good or bad? We're defining our current reality. What do we have for systems? Later on, we'll look and see, is this good? Could it be better? But this first step of saying, can we do better? How are we working remotely? Is to make sure you've got a good, accurate, and true assessment of where you are today. Because when you're looking at all these different types of ways that you can connect your office to your users and back and forth and all things through there, there's really two major categories that all those things fall into. And again, neither one is specifically right or wrong, but people will tend to go through an idea of, let's bring the users to the data or the data to the users. If data and users are in two different places, something's got to move. What's the primary direction? And this has been a theory and a possibility for, gosh, decades now. I mean, however long remote desktops have been around. I mean, it's not, and when we're talking about the idea of bringing data to the users, we'll see a different list of things, but that's the idea of something like a BIM 360 world. But it doesn't have to be that. There's also Autodesk Revit Server. There's all sorts of different things, caching servers, all sorts of different solutions that can make working remotely faster and better based off of using technology to pre-download, we'll say, data so that users don't have to wait and double click on something and 5 minutes later it finally opens because it finished downloading. Bringing the users to the data is more that virtual side where you've got a terminal and you're virtually sending yourself through the internet to a place that's next to your data. So it's all sitting there. There's nothing saying that you might use both types of solutions, to help out with how you're connecting yourself to the office. But thinking about it in this fashion, again, helps to break things down into logical, analytical chunks that we can then say, okay, this is working well, this is not. If you're using both a bringing data to the users and a bringing users to the data methodology, a question that's reasonable to ask is, should we be doing both? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is no. But if we think about it in this form, is there a level of consolidation that can be done and make us more efficient? It's worth talking about. When we're talking about those two different types of platforms, then these are some of the common types of things. There's dozens and probably hundreds, maybe thousands of different possible solutions out there of things that people could use to bring data to users or users to data. And it's really just a matter of, how do you tend to work when you're working remotely and thinking about that IT infrastructure side of things? Are people working off of the machine, the laptop, the desktop, the whatever that's physically in front of them? Or are they working on a machine that is geographically separated from where they are sitting today? That gets us to that spot of, am I bringing data to the users or users to the data? Define it. We're, again, right at this point, we're not making any judgment calls, but let's define, what are we using? The bringing users to the data, there's, again, many different types of virtual desktop solutions that are out there, many of them. In the data to users, if you're a Revit-based company, there's a more limited number of solutions that will functionally work with Revit and work sharing and work sets. But there are a fair number of things out there, like Dropbox and Box. If you're Revit and you're doing multi-user work sharing on a Revit file, you should probably already know by now that Dropbox is a horrible way to try and do multi-user sharing with Revit and work sets. For other types of things, for your DWG backgrounds and other stuff, can absolutely work there. Maybe there's better solutions, but let's start defining that. And once you've got that defined, we know, here's some of that IT infrastructure of what's going on behind the scenes. Here's the technologies that we're using in either direction when we're passing data around. Now we start asking those questions. We've defined that version of reality for those things, and understand, how's it working? Is it fast or slow? Does it just work? Or is it buggy? Yeah, what is the end user experience that your colleagues, your team is running through? Is it working really well for some people, but there's a handful of others that it's not working well for because of available bandwidth at wherever they happen to be? It's questions to ask. In the end, are people able to be productive? Knowing that we've got people that might be working on alternative working schedules, not working a 8 to 5 type of day. Maybe it's a little bit here, a little bit there, because we've got to worry about kids in virtual schools or blended learning schools as well. There's all sorts of things through there that we have to be aware of and thinking about. But now we start turning around and say, okay, what are these answers? And when we're talking about fast or slow, let's not just go around and saying, hey, Joe, I'll just use my own name. How's performance of Revit as we're going and connecting through the VPN to open up a file? I might say, oh yeah, it's fine, but let's get to something a little bit more empirical. How long does it actually take to open up that file? How long does it take for you to sync to Central? And let's get some actual measurable data through here, in addition to the emotional data of, are you happy or sad with the performance of your working environment? So start to answer these, and again, make it something measurable. It's the whole idea of those SMART goals. Well, we're talking about having SMART measurables in answering these questions. It was great last week, but this week for some reason it's less bad or less good. To what degree? To how is it working through there? Let's identify those things as we're looking at it, and dig into those specific metrics. That helps us get an understanding of what's happening with our infrastructure and how well is the system environment, the system performance out there. And as we're looking at answering these questions, we also go to that next spot of saying, in those software applications, how is any individual piece of software working? AutoCAD's fine, Revit is slow, or vice versa. These are good, but then software X is giving me problems, or software Y is perfectly fine, whatever. We need to identify what is happening for all those different applications and make sure you get a thorough understanding of what applications people are actively using. And where possible, see if you can get an idea. Did somebody grab something downloaded on their phone that they're using to help out that isn't officially a company sanctioned or purchased piece of software? What is that collection of software that's out there? Again, getting this stuff to reflect your reality. And then as you're looking at all the different tools, are they appropriate for the infrastructure? Are you getting everything out of that? And if you're not appropriate for the infrastructure, then you get the next question of, well, do we change the software or do we change the infrastructure? There's no easy question to that, or sorry, no easy answer to that, but it's a question that we need to ask to be able to understand what's getting better. Is it a matter of we just need to get a better internet pipeline going into the office where everybody's remoting into their computers and then we'll be fine? Okay, that's not an unreasonable solution. Or is it looking at that and saying, we were recently threatened with a ransomware attack on our own server, and there's an IT initiative now to go to the cloud, so we've got better backups of security and redundancy in case something like this ever happens again. And once we go to the cloud, now we have to rethink how we're using our desktop applications because we're accessing data in a different way. Those are all perfectly good and valid questions that we need to be asking ourselves as we're just breaking it down into the component parts and seeing how we're doing things today. And with all of those tools, are they actually promoting or helping with collaboration when you're in physically separated areas? And there's some interesting places like that. So for example, would I say that AutoCAD in and of itself promotes virtual collaboration? You could probably argue in both directions, but I'd probably say that in and of itself, in a silo, AutoCAD alone doesn't have a lot of tools for that multi-user collaborative effort. Now, if you went to AutoCAD for the web, if you added BIM 360 design, if you add in virtual meetings and screen sharing, absolutely, it can 100% be there, but maybe not always in and of itself. Now, you might be thinking of this and saying, well, no, Joe, you're wrong because of this, this, this. That's completely fine. There's no issue with that. There's aspects of this that are very much opinions that are coming through, and those opinions be driven by how do you use the application? How do you go about your day-to-day processes of what you're doing? And that's going to be different from any one firm to another. So it's not, there's not any single solution through there, but there's a good process that you can go through to make sure that the solution that you're at right now is going to be good for your firm, good for your company. And as you're looking at this then, as you're thinking about these things, as soon as you have more than one person involved in a company, you're going to have a difference of opinion. Depending on your own personality, maybe that happens even within just yourself. But we have to be thinking about, okay, this is my opinion on, yes, this is great for this, that, the other, but is my opinion the only one that matters? Probably not. So one of the things I would strongly suggest as you're looking at these types of things, is this promoting collaboration? Is that whatever is going on through here? Go ahead and get yourself a good devil's advocate. I've mentioned this in different webcasts along the years. I think the first time I ever mentioned it was when evaluating software upgrades, maybe 10, 15 years ago. But it's still valid. The idea of a devil's advocate is find somebody out there that's not, the quintessential yes man type of person. That's not just going to agree with you, but has a different opinion, but is not somebody that's going to be a jerk about it, right? But we want to be able to understand those different perspectives that exist within our company. I mean, you could take this and apply it to life in general. Sure, why not? But we're going to be focusing in here on software, on technology, on remote working solutions. Finding that individual that can be a knowledgeable person that knows your business, that has experience. So you're looking at, maybe it's somebody inside the company, maybe it's not. Maybe it's somebody you know through a user group. Maybe it's IMAGINiT. Whatever is through there, let's find somebody to bounce these ideas off of and get some contrasting opinions. And then once we've got those wider range of facts and opinions that are out there, then we can start making some real decisions based off of a more complex, a more realistic and nuanced data set, instead of this is what I feel and everybody must go with it. So we need to go with that. And it does need to be somebody who's thinking positive, not just that negative person off in the corner. If you've got that and you've got the devil's advocate, you're figuring things out, you're working through the software applications, the infrastructure and everything else, let's go a little bit further then and also dig into the workflows. As you're thinking about this, it's kind of leading into that collaboration piece. So each part of these is bleeding into the next. We're talking about, is this a collaborative piece of software? Maybe yes, maybe no. Well, how do we use it? Could we use the software in a different way that would allow us to be more collaborative? And as we're going through that process, one of the big things is to make sure that, do you know what you don't know? And we'll always find that nobody knows everything. Absolutely. Getting that devil's advocate, that informed person to help out with it certainly aids in the process, because ideally that other person has bits of knowledge that fill in some of your gaps. And understanding that we don't have all this and trying to put ego and pride to the side, which is sometimes extraordinarily difficult. But do we know that we don't know it all and where the gaps of knowledge are? It's like, yeah, we're using BIM 360. We got BIM 360 design when Autodesk was providing the complimentary access when COVID started. We decided we really liked it and we're keeping on with using it, but all we've ever used it for is to save a Revit file and do file open and sync to central. We're not using any other aspect of the BIM 360 platform because we didn't need to use it. We got what we needed done, and we're happy enough with how it is, but well, are you leveraging everything that it can be? Are there other aspects of whatever software, AutoCAD, Revit, BIM 360, your collaboration platform? If you're in a Microsoft Teams meeting, are you using whiteboards? Should you be using whiteboards? Should you be using a different whiteboarding technology? All those different types of things start coming through. If you're having meetings, are your teams using webcams to show videos? I know that certainly from personal experience being on the sending and receiving end of this, if a video feed is on and you're seeing my face and I'm seeing your face, we are much more likely to be engaged and focused in on that active conversation instead of distracted by something else out there because, they can't see me anyway. It doesn't matter if I'm looking at my phone, scanning a different email, multitasking on something, and not giving what ought to have my full attention all that it should. Having those cameras on helps out with that. It helps out a lot with the emotional side of things as well. Of, yeah, there really is a person over there that is paying attention to me, and I'm paying attention to them. We got people process technology. That's a people thing that is really, really super important. I can't underemphasize that any. I can't overemphasize it enough, or reverse that. I can't overemphasize it too much. It's really, really important. And if needed, do you need to buy a 10, 20, 30? I don't know how much they cost. It's integrated into my laptop, but do you need to grab a little webcam to help out with these things? Do you have time with those groups to just be social? We've had a monthly team meeting across all of the building design technical staff once a month. Every month, just everybody gets together, talks about things. And then it seems to be a pattern of about once a quarter so far. We finish that up, and as we've gone into this more dispersed virtual mode, have a virtual happy hour. And we've got people East Coast, West Coast, everywhere in between. The last time we did this, we had our virtual happy hour start at 5 o'clock Eastern. And if I remember the timeline of everything correct, that virtual happy hour would have wrapped up somewhere around 3 a.m. Eastern. Just everybody was, not everybody there, but there were people coming in, people going out, but at some level or another, there were people involved in being virtually social with each other for a good long period of time. We just left it open. Let's go, let's talk, let's be. And that is, again, a super important thing as we're going through the social aspect, the human aspect, the mental, psychological aspect of everything through here. If we've got a specific example of those types of things that we need to think about, how are you going through red lines? How are you going through printing in particular? So if you have a C, D, E, whatever size piece of paper you need to print out, I'm working from home, I don't have that. I've got a 8.5 by 11 printer. I am hopefully not taking a sheet, dividing it into quadrants and printing it out onto a series of 8.5, 11 pieces of paper, taping it all together and doing whatever from that point. Hopefully not. Maybe I have to sometimes, but hopefully not. That just feels crazy unuseful in any number of ways. But as I'm doing that, then maybe I'm printing and I'll go pick it up from the office later on at whatever sort of time. Printing the PDFs and just looking at that and using any number of different pieces of software to work through it, be Bluebeam, BIM 360, whatever. How are you doing that? If you're doing a batch print and you're in an environment where you're working off of the computer that's physically in front of you, how do we go about making sure that your computer is not tied up on that task for too long and you're actually getting something done with your day? Can you print from Revit or AutoCAD? Or are you somebody that's in the staff that I don't have that app on my machine, so I got to get somebody else? Blatant plug alert through here. Have you ever heard of the IMAGINiT Clarity product? There are going to be solutions like Clarity, like others, that can go ahead and offset some of those efforts, where I could be on a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, anything, and be able to go to a company intranet site and say, hey, for this project, print out those sheets, walk away and get an email when it's done. Meanwhile, my computer's not locked up doing that work. I get to do something. I get to have more attention. I get to do all sorts of fancy fun things. So that's one example. There's all sorts of wonderful things that Clarity can do, but know what tools are out there for you so that you can be efficient with it. We have to know these things so we can make appropriate decisions on, is this a problem we need to solve, or is it just kind of sitting out there and we don't care so much? If we're looking at that from an overall project delivery standpoint and we're trying to understand better how all these things are coming around, it won't be just a Clarity world all the time. There's going to be all sorts of things out there. There's going to be things that we don't have time, and I'm already starting to run over a little bit, a 30-minute presentation of what are all the things we need to consider. What I'll say though is leverage us as you're going through that process. As IMAGINiT, we've been working in a hybrid world for remote access for over a decade now with different staff in different places. I've been in my role in a place where the nearest colleague on my team was almost 1,000 miles away. There's all sorts of things that we can do as we're working with companies across the US and Canada That can be, creative, maybe not a best practice yet because not enough people are doing it, but that's really cool. Or established best practices that we can bring that knowledge to help you out as we're going through it all. It can be through what we're talking about here, a remote services health check, where if we're doing that with you, maybe we spend up to a day talking about things, identifying your existing conditions, the way you are working today, interview and work with a couple other people to make sure we're understanding that true environment from a couple different perspectives of how things are going. Take that out, take that information, work with it from that consultant reaching out to other people. There's, imagine it as a whole, well over 100 people that we've got on the technical side alone that we can bounce things off of for different ideas, whether it's buildings, manufacturing, civil, you name it. But within just the buildings team, grabbing that core group and saying, hey, there's this, how does that work? Let's test something out together. Come back to you with some recommendations, letting us be that devil's advocate for you, working with you to identify what are places that you can make tangible improvements. And from those improvements, just start immediately, quickly reaping the benefits of working in a more efficient situation. So yeah, there's the plug alert of there's got to be something there for you to be able to leverage IMAGINiT to make yourselves work better. But there's also just the overall path that we were talking through here and just things to be thinking about. Where are those places that you can make small incremental improvements that over time will have a massive impact on your business? I'd say, again, we can be that tool for you. There can be tools that can just make things better. I'll say with that, let's open it up for the questions. I'll say thank you very much for the time that we've had here together, and reach out. Let us know where we can be of use to you. And with that, I'm looking at what I see inside the chat panel, and I do not have anything showing as far as a next question.
I don't have any questions over here either.
Okay.
But if anyone does have any questions after this, feel free to email us. Also, I will have a copy of this recording available and sent to each one of you. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Joe.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, everybody. Take care.